Hi everyone, it's Jill Foster here for Penny Black with the fourth in a series of 5 videos designed to demonstrate basic techniques for inking and stamping with our brushstroke stamps. And in today's video, I will be sharing stamping using our Blissful Blossom stamp. And here's a look at the stamping that we will be doing. And this is a really easy technique that combines markers, a little bit of painting, and also ink pads. And here's a list of all of the colors and supplies that I'll be using in creating this stamped panel and card today. And I will put the supply list back up at the very end of the video, so if you want to look at it in more detail, it'll be right up on screen and you can hit pause to check it out even more. To begin, I have our Blissful Blossom stamp. In my stamp positioning tool, I'm using the Misty by My Sweet Petunia, and I am coloring directly onto my stamp using Tombow Dual Brush Pens. And I'm using the brush tip of the marker and kind of turning it on the side and coloring onto the flowers. And by using the marker, I'm able to get just the color applied to the blooms. And this is a water-soluble marker, so what I'll be able to do is go in just a bit and blend some of that stamping to give it a nice, smooth watercolor look. You could also do this with distress markers or memento markers. I chose these because I like the way that the ink goes onto the stamp and also how it looks when it is blended with water. And I just really like that color of blue that's available in this marker. I'm moving on now to the leaves. Now I am stamping onto hot press 140-pound watercolor paper, and I've chosen hot press watercolor paper because it has a smoother surface, so it captures more of the detail of the stamp than, for example, a cold press watercolor paper that has just a bit more texture to it. So here I'm just working my way around. Now I'm not too concerned at how exactly that stamping looks because I will be going back in and blending it with water. So I am going to now add some brown here to the stems. And I am working in fairly small sections so that I'm able to stamp that before the ink starts to dry on the stamp. Now if you wanted a really loose watercolor look, you could color the entire stamp with these markers and then mist it with water and stamp, and that would give you a totally different look. It would be sort of a looser watercolor look. There wouldn't be quite as much detail, but that also is a really neat look. It just depends on what you're going for on your card. I am stamping this, just the image one time to demonstrate this technique, but I think the stamp would look really pretty layered, stamped multiple times in position to cover, like for an example, the entire background of a card. And then you could pop up a sentiment on a die cut piece or add a tag on the front. So now, without removing this from my stamp positioning tool, I'm just taking a paintbrush and some water, and I'm just moving around and blending that ink that I have stamped. So it's not a really dramatic step, but I do think it just gives a little bit smoother look and more of a watercolored look to this panel. And throughout this series of videos, I'm just demonstrating different techniques that you can mix and match these techniques with different brushstroke stamps. So if you have a different brushstroke stamp but you want it to have this look, you could use this technique and these inks and these markers to achieve that look. And really at any point here, a person could stop. So if you don't want to keep adding more layers of color, you just like the lighter watercolor look, you could just do all your blending and then stop and move on to creating your card. With the hot press watercolor paper, I do find that the stamping, the actual ink from the markers, does seem to absorb pretty well into that paper. So it will blend for you with the water, but it doesn't over blend to me. It's pretty easy to control just because it's not sitting up on the surface of that paper. It really does soak into the paper itself, which is another nice thing if you are looking to retain some of the detail that is included within the stamp itself. I think it's a little easier to see here with the leaves how blending that out with the water does give it a bit of a smoother look. But like I said before, I did not remove this or my stamp from the stamp positioning tool, because in just a minute I am going to do some more stamping using some ink pads to add some extra shading in here. So you won't want to take it out if this is the particular technique that you want to give a try. Just a little touch here with just water on those stems. Also kind of intensifies the color and darkens it up when the water is added. And before I move on to this next step, I do want to be sure that that is completely dry. So I'm just drying it here with my heat tool, but you could also just wait if you're more patient than me and let it air dry. So now I'm coming back and I'm going to use some mini Ranger Archival inks. And this first color that I'm using is Cobalt. And I'm just sort of using the corner of that ink pad to pounce some of that ink into the center of the flowers. And then I'm stamping it down. And you can see how instantly this adds such gorgeous shading to those flowers, but it keeps that great watercolor look. Now I am inking them and stamping them a couple of times, and that's just to darken up the color. I like the contrast of the dark center as it moves out towards the outer portion of the flower that's been painted and diluted with water. And this cobalt color is just a beautiful, rich, deep blue. And now on the leaves, I'm going to use another Mini Ranger Archival ink pad, and this is the color of Library Green. Now this is a permanent ink, so it's not going to do any blending with water, but that is not a problem because I'm not planning on going back in and doing any more with this once it is stamped. So I am just again turning that ink pad sort of on its side so I can get it right on to those leaves. Not covering the whole leaf, but just trying to get more towards the base of the leaf where it's closest to the stem. And it really is that simple to get this beautiful no line watercolor look using this Blissful Blossoms brushstroke stamp. And I just took it out here of my stamp positioning tool and snapped a picture for you so you could see what that was like. Now I did use this panel that I stamped. It's a 5x7 panel to create a card. I masked around the outer perimeter with painter's tape and applied distress inks and some stamping on the inside. And I do have another video where I demonstrate this technique, and I'll link that down for you in the YouTube description box below. If you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, and our website and blog. And I'll also link those down below in the YouTube description box. And as promised, here's the supply list of everything used on today's technique.